Hey, this is Gina Grad.
Hi, this is Teresa Strasser.
Hi, everyone. This is Mike Errico.
Hey there. This is Casey Cavalier.
I'm Rocky Rose.
And you are listening to The Jay Franze Show.
Lucky you.
Welcome to The Jay Franze Show. A behind-the-curtain look at the entertainment industry with insights you can't pay for and stories you've never heard. Now, here's your host, Jay Franze.
Well, hello and welcome to the show. I am Jay Franze, and if you are new here, this is where we take a deep dive into the entertainment industry to provide you with valuable insights and entertaining stories. This week, we get to talk with one of Nashville's finest engineers. We get to talk with Tony Cottrill. Tony has worked with such greats as Ronnie Milsap, Exile, and Diamond Rio. And tonight, we get to talk to him about how he got his start in the industry, how he transitioned from a musician to an engineer, and we'll take a deep dive into how he balances the studio and the road. Now, I first met Tony back in 1989. It was at the recording workshop in Ohio. He was actually my first engineering instructor, and I ran into him again years later at the SAE Institute in Nashville, where he hired me to be an instructor. He truly is a great guy, and I can't wait to talk to him tonight. So if you'd like to join in, comment, or fire off any questions, please head over to jfranze.com. Now let's get started. Tony, sir, how are you?
Howdy. Glad to be here, Jay. I've been looking forward to this. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it is my pleasure, sir. I'm happy to have you here. I mean, I know we go way back, but there are a lot of stories that I want to hear. So I'm very excited where this night's going to take us.
Yeah, me too.
But, I mean, normally I would like to just start off with how your career started, but I know you have a background that started a little rough. Is that something you mind talking about?
Well, thanks for asking, Jay. There's not many people that know how difficult things were kind of in the beginning, and I've never really told this story, and, may shed some light on my personality, kind of hardcore sometimes. Before I was 10 years old, the innocence of the world was kind of extinguished. For me, I grew up fast. I came from a family of 8 kids. I was the youngest of 8, but in 1964, my sister Jenna died of a brain aneurysm. She was 15 years old. Of course, I was really young, didn't really totally understand what was going on at that time. And then 2 years later, in 1966, my brother Georgie got killed in Vietnam, hostile fire, explosive devices. And then in 68, my sister Betty, another 2 years later, died of throat cancer. So all within a 6-year time frame before I was ever, like I say, 10 years old, we had three tragedies in our family, along with my parents getting divorced and our home burning down to the ground. And I don't know, it didn't scar me or anything like that, but it was life kind of smacking you in the face there at an early age, But anyway, that's a story. I'm not trying to get anybody to feel sorry for me. I think, in our youth, it establishes a lot of who we are, But I was determined. I was determined to try to make something happen. Betty was the one who exposed me to music when I was really young. This was music during the 60s. Well, I didn't really realize I was young, but she was dressed me up in 60s attire and drag. Or can you say attire and drag in the same sentence now? I don't know, but
sure, why not?
Okay, why not? She would take me along to these concerts, and the energy, that was going on there in the late 60s. It was just, it was contagious, I remember she took me to see the Herman's Hermits at the High State Fair, 66 or something like that. I mean, it was just, when the whole Beatles thing and the British invasion was going on. I didn't realize all this stuff, but I see that girls are passing out. There's ambulances rushing them to the hospital and medics everywhere. And I'm like, what is going on here?
You're like, I want to be part of this.
Well, yeah, I mean, I don't want to see anybody getting hurt or anything, but anyway, so I bugged everybody in my family till I got a drum kit. I think 1967, I got a drum kit, At that time, when the Beatles were in Ed Sullivan, if you had any exposure to music at that time, I mean, that changed our lives. It was just amazing. It was just an amazing thing to see. I know there's a lot of people like the Beatles are overrated and, that kind of a thing these days. But I tell you what, when they came on TV, it was just alien. You know what I mean? It was just another world. I remember going shopping in the town we lived in. They had a Ringo kit in the window, man. I go, just something you wanted. So, but my teen years, kind of musically, I guess, more of a product of the 70s, through the teen years, and technically studio wise, I would say a product of the 80s, which was through my 20s and when I started doing studio stuff. And then through my 30s, I spent my 30s pretty much performing as a drummer. And I mean, I spent 30 years of my life as a drummer in this industry. And most people just know me as an audio guy. I think because prior to social media, that's when I was a performer. So there's not really any social media posts that show me performing and things like that. But anyway, that's a little bit of background there, Jay. So I appreciate you letting me tell that.
I appreciate you telling it. I mean, you talk about the 80s and I just instantly think spandex. I mean, that's the time that I grew up as well. And
exactly. Yeah.
I picture, hair metal bands and things like that.
My wife's sisters are a little younger, twin sisters are a little younger, and they talk about all the great music in the 80s. And even there was, and they'll talk about this band and that band, and I'll go, 70s? How about 70s? So the late 70s, it was amazing, the music that was, you think about it, Aerosmith came out, ZZ Top came out, Kansas came out, Fog Hat. What was going on in the 70s musically was so inspirational. I mean, if you had any musical ability, it just kind of sucked you in. So,
well, I remember it too. I mean, I grew up primarily in the 80s. High school days were in the 80s.
Yeah.
So to me, it was too over the top for me. It was just very poppy at the time. Even the rock bands, even Van Halen turned into Jump, bringing synthesizers in. There was a great song, and it was great and all, but it was just not for me.
Yeah.
But when I met you, you were a drummer, and I met you to throw this far back, just talking about the 80s. I went to school at the Recording Workshop. It's the first engineering school that I went to, and you were my teacher. Mm-hmm. How did that all come about to you?
Well, the Recording Workshop, I owe everything to that school. And of course, that's when I met you there, 89. The town is called Chillicothe in Ohio. It's a little town, 20,000 people, something like that, and I've been playing music there. It wasn't a large music scene by any means, but I was able to, work in bands and things like that. Well, Joe Waters was the owner of the Recording Workshop, and I worked at a Sunoco station just up the road from where the school was. And Joe knew my sisters and my brother and the hardships my family went through. So if you got somebody that's going to help push you along and give you a break in this business, it's really needed. Joe was that guy. I remember him coming through my gas station. I pumped his gas, and this must have been, I don't know, Jay, 74 or something like that. I'm over 50 now, but anyway. Joe says, you need to come down and check out my studio, Tony. And I'm like, I would freaking love to, name a time. He says, well, come on down tomorrow about 8 o'clock or something. I get down to the studio, and he's in there, and he's recording, and he's got these big JBL monitors. I'd never seen anything like it, just, I could say, a small town, and got this studio there. And he was playing back probably something that really wasn't that good, but to me, it was gold coming out of those speakers, and it was contagious, just to hear playback and big studio monitors and seeing the band in the studio and everybody just really enjoying what they were doing, and the creativity that was going on really made an impression on me. And so Joe, the owner, he was a national artist there for a while, had a record out. He was up, this is around like Kenny Rogers time and The Gambler and things like that. So he put a band together to go on the road and do shows and hired me to play drums.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. You probably didn't know that, did you?
No.
So I was out doing road work with Joe. And then I'd also do his demo sessions. So he was a songwriter and he worked with a lot of Nashville songwriters, even though we were in Ohio. There's a lot of Nashville people coming up. But so we would do demos on Joe's songs, and then he would bring people in, like, I'm going to throw some names out there. This is going back a little bit, but he'd bring drummers in like Jerry Kerrigan and James Stroud up to the workshop. So there we are in Chillicothe, Ohio, being exposed to these amazing players. And Kerrigan would play the drums of the master session to the demo that I played on, even though it was the same parts. It didn't feel the same, So that's when you kind of learn that there's something special going on there. It just isn't a matter of playing the pattern,
Right.
But so Joe gave me that break, and he decided, I guess this is around 83, and he decided touring wasn't for him. And so I remember I was doing a session with him one day. That's when we were doing drum booths, and I was in the drum booth, and he was in the studio, and he gets on a talk back mic and says, "Hey, Tony, how would you like to learn how to run all this gear?" And, it was intimidating. I still wanted to be a drummer. I was afraid if I went into audio school that it would take away from practicing and playing drums and things. But anyway, so he put me through audio school there at the recording workshop. And then after that, he gave me a job teaching. And I was an instructor there for, I guess, almost 10 years. And man, just learned so much about miking technique and met people from all over the world. You were there. I mean, we'd get people from Israel and just all over the world coming to that little town of Masseyville,
Right.
Ohio.
It was the only school there was at the time.
A lot of people claim this, but it really is the oldest recording school. It's the original. Yeah. It really is the original, and other people will say that their school was, but I can tell you that, some of those who claim to be the oldest school actually kind of took some of that curriculum and went other places and started a school with no names being mentioned.
Right.
So, you know what I'm talking about.
I can tell you too. I remember going to that school. I read about it in the back of a music magazine.
Yeah.
And I just told my father, I said, "This is what I want to do.
Yeah.
This is where I want to go. This is what I want." We had like maybe a day or two to make a decision. I said, "I'm going." He said, "Okay." So he buys me a plane ticket, sends me off to Ohio.
From Boston.
Yeah, from Boston. It was on my birthday, January 9th, I remember. And I remember arriving in Columbus, Ohio, and I don't know who it was that picked me up from the airport, but somebody picked me up from the airport and drove me to the school. And being from a big city in Boston and showing up at this little tiny town in Ohio, and all I could remember is it smelled horrible. Because the paper factory down the road, it was the worst smell I had ever come across. But I got used to it. And then there was like just a handful of cabins, and I'm living in this tiny little cabin with a handful of other people. And it was just an experience, but it was an experience I'll never forget. It was that long ago, and I still remember it like it was yesterday.
Man, the shock of that, huh? You were coming from Boston. Imagine coming from Denmark or something, and coming to
I know I had somebody from
Masseyville.
London in my program.
Yeah. Oh yeah. From all over the world. The school's still going on.
I told the wife I want to drive by. It's about an hour and a half away from me right now.
Just right up the road from you, Cincinnati. Yeah. Well, hey, interesting, like a time capsule here, but back to Joe's band. Some really great players in that band. I had no idea really what I had fallen into, but the steel guitar player, his name's Tom Boffman, and this is 83. And Tom left Chillicothe. He's from Chillicothe. He left and became a player down here when Opryland was happening. Opryland was basically like a theme park, and a lot of musicians, the Diamond Rio guys met there. And it was just really quite a launching pad. But anyway, so Tom Boffman called me the other day. His son is 19 years old, and he's really into audio, and he's really into drums, and he wanted to know if I could help him out. And so he's working with me now, his son, 19 years old, doing shop work, and he's out doing some touring with me on this artist that I'm out with. But ain't that crazy, man?
It's crazy how it comes around. And I was living in New York after going to the recording workshop. I went back to Boston, worked in a couple studios there for a little while. And then I moved to New York and actually opened a studio. I had a studio built from the ground up, and it was beautiful. And I was sitting there at the time, and I was at the dining room table, and I was just looking at a Shania Twain CD, and there was a magazine, a mix magazine next to it. And I open up the mix magazine, and I see the school SAE, and I was like, I want to go teach there.
Okay.
And my friends are like, yeah, okay, that's going to happen. And then I open up the CD, and I see Bob Bullock's name in it.
Yeah.
I said, I'm going to go work for Bob Bullock.
Okay.
And they're like, yeah, all right. So I packed my stuff up and just left everything. My house, I had just bought a house. I had opened the studio. I packed it all up and drove to Nashville. And the very next day, I walked into the school to say, I want to work here. And they sent me up to this office. And I walk in the office, and it's you. And you are the head instructor at the school. And I'm like, oh, hey, fancy meeting you here. And then you ended up eventually connecting me to that job. And I worked there for years.
I was a Jay Franze advocate. You got to hire this guy. So
it was too funny to me, though. I mean, because, last I saw you before that was in Chillicothe at the school.
Yeah. Well, man, I tell you what, you were in this business long enough. It gets small.
It does. It really does. So, I mean, as we're talking about that, and you talk about you started by playing drums, and obviously you're engineering now, and you're doing a lot of live sound, and you're on the road, which to me is always fascinating. But how does playing drums now play into the craft of engineering?
Interesting. Man, I think about that a lot. So I had a band I put together back in Ohio for the sole purpose of getting a record deal in Nashville. That was why I put this band together. And we had a Nashville producer, Bill Halverson, Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, Cream, and he used to come to the workshop and lecture. And so he was our producer, and he was finding us songs, and we were out playing and traveling around doing the van and the trailer tour, doing the circuit. In the early 90s, you could make a living playing these two-step clubs, line dance clubs, 4 or 5 nights a week. You can make a living doing that. I say all over hell and half of Georgia, but so one of the stops on our circuit was Miss Kitty's. And again, this is all old history, man, but it's good history. Miss Kitty's in Atlanta, Marietta, Georgia, just north of Atlanta, there was an institution. The house band prior to us was Travis Tritt. In his club days, he was the house band there, his country club band. As a matter of fact, country club video was shot at Miss Kitty's. And then after Travis got his deal, Danny Shirley with Confederate Railroad came in as the house band. So after Danny vacated that, they needed a house band, and they asked my band, Hank Law, if we would move down from Ohio and take this house position. And we just jumped on it. And it made sense because we're only, 3 hours from Nashville. So our producer said it was a great idea. He could get label people to come down and see us, and we could showcase. And it doesn't hurt to have Miss Kitty's behind your name and the reputation that place has, right? So, but anyway, I know this is really hard to believe for people out there, but the band broke up. Yes, it did.
Bands break up?
Yeah, they do. They do. So I ended up going to a club. It's a 3,000-seat club there in Kennesaw, Georgia, called Cowboys, famous venue. And every Friday night would be a national act coming in, all the national acts from the 90s. And we were a top 40 sweating jukebox band. And, we played all that 90s country music that we thought was kind of blasé that everybody thinks is really cool right now. Here's where this kind of comes around. The bass player, his name was Randy Brown, or RK, as he's known now. He's in Nashville now.
Oh, yeah, I know Randy.
You know Randy? He was a bass
he's
player.
He's played on several sessions with me.
Man, he's amazing, isn't he? And so he was the band leader in that band. And it was a big stage. And if you've worked with Randy, he can't see.
Right.
So, as a drummer, with a bass player, the bass player watches your foot and you play off of that. Well, that doesn't happen with Randy. He's not watching your foot.
Not if you're blind.
Exactly. So you better be landing on the quarter note and you better be landing on the eighth note. And I tell you what, that guy would, like I say, he's a band leader. We'd go on break and he would just rip me to pieces, man. He would Oh, he would tear me apart, and I would get so mad at this guy. But, determination, like, I'll show you, man, I'll show you. And so I would practice every day at my place. And I came up with a drum book of exercises because I was raising a son and married. And my wife and I were in Atlanta with a boy, and we didn't have any family down there. So I had, had those responsibilities, but I had to practice or I would lose this job. You know what I mean? Anyway, I kind of came up with this little practice routine. So focused on the click, every one of these patterns, I programmed the patterns. And, at that time, I think I was using Performer, before MIDI and audio was married together. You had just MIDI, and then you would have to lock MIDI up to SMPTE, to your machine or whatever. But anyway, I would practice 2 or 3 hours a day with a click track. Religiously practice, and I got really good, and so I guess to bring that full circle, my playing taught me a lot about pocket. And so when it comes to doing session work now and then after that, I can tell you if the acoustic guitar is in the pocket with the drummer or the bass guitar is in the pocket with the drummer. So my playing really disciplined me for tempos.
That's awesome. You don't think about it like that. You think you just go in and press a button and light turns red and everybody goes, but you have responsibility when you're in there, and the more musical you are, the more that you can not only capture a good sound, but you can actually make decisions and participate in some of the producing of the project itself. Mm-hmm. Where did it go? From educating to recording, or from educating to going on the road?
Well, what I wanted to do was to teach and tour all at the same time. A little bit of both worlds. I really tried to create that. It was something that just wasn't achievable. When you teach, you pretty much have to dedicate yourself to it. When you tour, you know how that goes. I got pretty burnt out on teaching audio. So I'll take on some students, but getting in front of a class, a large group of students, really, it doesn't appeal to me anymore. I really got burnt out on it. So I just basically just kind of cut that educational cord and just went full on touring.
So who was the first artist you went on the road with?
Well, I kind of played around with, I know you had like Matt McClure on your show. I kind of played around like when I was at SAE, go out and doing some sub work for him. Steve Holy. Yep. What a great singer. Yeah. So I suppose, I did some touring audio wise before coming to Nashville, but not any name performers.
Well, you got several names behind you now.
I've been fortunate, Jay, and going back and talking about Randy and seeing impaired as a musician, but I was Ronnie Milsap's monitor engineer.
Right.
For many, many years. And anybody who knows Ronnie, he's blind, seeing impaired. Right. Just incredible. I mean, his keyboard text says he hears what only bugs and dogs hear. And, right. and being his monitor engineer, man, it took me to a whole nother level. My ears to a whole nother level, Jay. You remember we had a program called Golden Ears. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And so, you're all cocky and like, oh, yeah, I can hear this and I can hear that. I got golden ears, blah, blah, blah. Well, you get out there with Milsap, you go, well, I got
golden ears.
Yeah, I had no idea. So he was the one that really, even though I was mixing live audio, wedges, he's a wedge guy. There was like 22 boxes up on the stage, He was the one who really turned around the way I hear a studio mix. All of his players had incredible ears. They would, when they were ringing out their monitors, they would all sweep, whoop, like a human oscillators, and they would find holes and they would find frequencies that were building up. And 400. I'm hearing 400. Ronnie, but he didn't know about your graphic EQ over there. But he'd bang out on the piano. He'd go, "Okay, baby, see, you got 250 over there and 315. This is about 280. If you could just cut 3 dB of 250 and 4 dB of 315, we'll be able to take care of that." That kind of stuff, right? So amazing experience, wouldn't trade that for nothing. And, I was Ronnie's monitor guy, and his front of house engineer, Kerry West, Gotti West's son, just amazing. I learned so much from him too. But, it just kind of got to the point, Jay, where I wanted to go out front and mix.
Before you do that, let me ask you a question about this. I mean, you're going out on the road with somebody who, like we said, has his own set of golden or if not platinum ears. So what does it feel like when you're out there? What's going through your mind taking that first gig?
Oh, man. Oh, it's intense. And, you got to be confident in your abilities and don't let them see you sweat, So it's not an easy gig. And now to sum up that feeling, I've never parachuted. Probably something like that. Is my parachute going to open? You know what I mean? At that time, Jay, I'm kind of thinking back through this. I got a call from the dean of a university here in town, Belmont University, and they knew my work at SAE, and they needed a live audio teacher. So my interview with the dean was, I'll come and teach, but I tour. And so we discussed how much I tour. Well, as long as you can be here on these days and be here for these showcases, you can continue to tour. So right about that time, Ronnie Milsap's position came open. And I interviewed for that as a phone interview. And Ronnie's previous monitor engineer was one of my students at SAE, Kirby.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Kirby was, and Ronnie loved Kirby, and he was pretty excited that he was going to get the monitor engineer who taught the monitor engineer that he loved so much. So I kind of had that coming in. I had a little bit of like, he has some trust for me. He knows a little bit about my past, but first time dealing with Ronnie and the way the monitor engineer had to set up with Ronnie, his piano would face you, and you had to learn how to read his facial expressions, whether something was wrong or not. That's the way he communicated basically with you. You could tell after a while, you could tell if something wasn't right, and we had, there was, 4 different mixes around the stage, and the level of those mixes is how he could tell where he was in space. You know what I mean? So that the downstage mix versus the mix to his right, he would know that he would just be able to hear the distance between those two. So if he got up from the piano, he would kind of have an idea how far to go. I know it's a crazy thing to think about. Yeah, I mean, he's a legend. He had 40 number 1 hits, and it was an intense position. I think he really liked me as a monitor guy. I think he didn't want to see me go. So anyway, I guess Ronnie was doing 50 or 60 dates a year at that time, and I was holding down a full-time job at Belmont teaching, and I think the students really liked the fact that their instructor was touring and was doing that for a living, teaching them live audio, and I was doing live audio. So yeah, and it kind of turned out to be where I just wasn't a campus guy, and they wanted me there more and more, and my heart wasn't in it, man. I enjoyed touring too much, so, but anyway, we parted ways.
So what was your first front of house gig then?
Well, I'm sure you can relate to this, and most people can, but back at the workshop, we recorded a lot back there. On the weekends, they would open up the studios for the instructors, because if you remember, school was only Monday through Friday, and then Saturday and Sunday, the instructors would go into the studios, and we would camp out the entire weekend and record bands and do our record.
I remember being invited to a couple of those.
Yeah. Columbus was a fantastic music scene up there. Cincinnati, Jay, amazing talent. So what ended up happening then is these groups you would do the record with them, and all the effects, the songs and things like that. So when they go out to do their record release party, they would go, "Hey, since you know all the songs, our effects, this, blah, blah, could you come out and mix our show?" And that's what got me into it, not knowing really anything about it.
Well, that's a good point, because it truly is a different skill set.
Yeah.
Recording and mixing a record, even recording and mixing could be considered a different skill set. So now that you throw in live sound, what's that transition like for you?
Well, the biggest difference in studio and live sound is that in the studio, it's a controlled environment. I know you have a nice room there, Jay, acoustically treated, and you don't have any standing waves, and, things aren't bouncing off the concrete floors and bouncing off of steel and that kind of. So the biggest challenge for anybody doing live audio, I mean, still to this day, is the acoustic environment. That's the biggest one. With where things are now, I carried my own digital console. Everything it's dialed in. So all I have to do, which can be really a lot of work, is I have to make the room as neutral as possible.
Right.
So my program mix will fit within that room where it isn't too bass heavy or too bouncy or too bright or too mid-rangey or that kind of a thing. So that's the biggest challenge. I guess that's kind of why I like outdoor shows. You don't have any
no
surfaces.
Interference.
Yeah, right. To bounce off of, and you can get into some of these venues that some of these places they put entertainment. It's just like you question it. Why would you put a stage here? It's all steel and it's all concrete, and it's just there's no way you're going to make a mix sound good. So, but that's the toughest. That's probably the toughest part is just dealing with the acoustics.
Do you consider that a challenge and try to beat it?
Of course. Oh, of course. Oh, yeah.
We're all competitive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm not going to be defeated, but you learn your tricks. You know what I'm saying? And then after you tour enough, you repeat rooms. I tried for a while to save like EQ for this room or EQ for that room, and it changes.
Never really works.
That never really works, because your console file changes too, and you might have a different drummer.
The amount of people that are in the room could change
the amount of people in the room, totally.
That's crazy. People don't think about that, but the human body absorbs frequencies just like any other soft surface.
When you're sound checking, your space is empty, so you're getting a lot of reflections, a lot of bounces and things like that, and you just kind of have to anticipate what the audience. I always check with the promoter and find out how many seats are sold. Maybe kind of curious why I want to know that, because I just want to know how much sound's going to be absorbed in what areas. I'll ask, is the balcony sold? That kind of a thing, or is an arena is the top layer sold?
Right.
That, just so you know, because the bodies of water they're going to absorb a lot of your sound. So you kind of have to anticipate that.
And there's a lot of arenas that they don't sell the top portion, or they can't sell it either way you want to look at it.
Yeah.
Or they don't sell behind the stage. So there's a lot of hard surfaces that never get covered.
Yeah. Yeah.
You went on the road with Exile, and you also worked in the studio with them. Mm-hmm. So which came first, the road or the studio?
You have the best questions, Jay. So the Exile position actually came through a guy in Cincinnati, Gary Curvis, who had an agency called Second Street Entertainment. And I knew Gary from back in the Ohio days, and Exile was looking for a front of house guy, and Gary called me about it. And this is when I was with Ronnie. And I say I wanted to move into a front of house position. From monitors, I mean, nothing wrong with somebody being a monitor engineer. Usually there's a lot more opportunity in this business for monitor engineers than there are front of house guys. There's just too many front of house guys. But so I took the Exile position based on wanting to mix front of house more, move away. And so, they were recording, and I'd be on the bus with them. They'd be talking about so-and-so engineer recording with so-and-so engineer and doing this and doing that. And every time they would do that, I would raise my hand. I do studio engineering.
Right.
And then the next week they'd talk about it. I raised my hand again. Hey, how about me? How about me over here? And so I just kept on bugging them. And so what it ended up happening was they had just gotten back together, and they were celebrating 50 years in music.
All original members too, right?
Yeah, original 5. And they wanted to do a DVD at the Franklin Theater. You know that theater well, I'm sure. And so I recorded it and brought it back here to my home studio and mixed it, and did the editing and things like that. And it's just an awesome live record. So I guess I kind of gained their trust that way.
Very cool.
Using the live audio thing and recording the show, which I do that. I record every show these days. You know, I got a mix on Elvie Shane, the artist I'm with now, by recording him live at the Basement East here in town.
Do you multi-track it or stereo?
Yeah, multi-track Pro Tools.
Really?
Yeah, Dante. You know, just Dante out of my console. Pro Tools is running every night. You know. And then, you know, sometimes we get lucky. We got the multi-tracks. Some bands like to do a lot of fixes. Some bands don't want to do fixes. Yeah, I record every night. And, you know, I try to use really good quality microphones out on the road, but also mics that will withstand the abuse of the road.
Sure.
You know, so I get pretty good recordings. So anyway, so then Exile decides they're going to do a Christmas record. And they let me do that. So I cut a Christmas record on them, and then they decided to go back and do all their hits digitally. So I recorded the hits record, and now I'm not touring with them, but I'm still recording them. They were just here and finished 14 songs, and I cut drums and bass and keys here at my place. Amazing material. JP and Sonny with the band is just writing great stuff, and they take it down to Paul down at County Q. You know Paul.
Oh yeah. Yep.
And Paul mixes it. So I'm still working with them, man. Even though I'm not on the road with them, we're still pals, buddies, and work together. And it's been a great relationship with those guys.
That's pretty cool. So, I mean, it's got to be cool for you. I mean, because we talk about this a lot, that live sound engineers typically don't get to work in the studio too much. And once a studio engineer goes on the road, they lose their contacts and the relationships they have with producers. You turn down one or two gigs and you never get to work again. People think, well, if you're a live sound engineer, your ears aren't good enough to be in the studio. But I don't think that's true. I think that it's just a different set of things that you're tuned into. And especially, if, like you mentioned earlier, with frequencies, to know the frequencies that well, that comes in extremely handy in the studio. There's no doubt in my mind that that's a benefit to you. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, you're out there on the road with this band. You show them that you have what it takes, even if it's persistence, to get into the studio. What's that like? Are you nervous going into the studio at that point?
Yeah. I mean, you're nervous at the point you want to do good, you know, and they'll test you.
You've recorded 1,000 times before that, but when somebody you have to convince to let you do it, that's a little bit more anxiety, I guess.
Well, that's kind of fun, though, isn't it?
Yeah, no,
that's kind of the fun. That's kind of the fun.
Like we said earlier,
like,
it's a challenge.
I'll show you what's happening here. And I think the longer we're in this business, the more confident we become.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm pretty confident in what I do right now. Everything I do isn't exactly up to where I would want it to be, but I go into a show with a lot of confidence. And I think probably, Jay, a lot of that comes from your troubleshooting skills, builds your confidence in that. In a live environment, anything can go wrong at any time, but you're confident in terms that you've been through so many devastating scenarios, you know, with gear breaking and things like that, your workarounds that, you know, you build your confidence and that you can handle most situations. You had Matt McClure on your show, and Matt's a good friend of both of ours, and Matt was an awesome front of house guy with Tanya and
Tanya Tucker, Steve Holy.
But you know what you said, he came off the road because he wanted to do studio stuff, and if he was on the road, he wasn't getting that call. So, man, I was really determined that you could do both because I love both. Man, there's nothing like live mixing. I mean, it's a thrill, man. It is intense. Every time that intro starts and downbeat happens, you know, it's like jumping out of an airplane. I've never done that, bungee jumping or what. I mean, anything could go wrong at any time.
Well, that's a good point. You're a musician as well as an engineer. So which do you find more gratifying, to be the drummer on stage or to be the guy at the front of house?
Definitely the front of house guy, you know, because you have control of everybody. I'm a control freak. You know what I mean? I got control of guitar players, a drum. You know what I mean? You're not conducting an orchestra or a symphony or anything like that, but you're the one putting the puzzle together.
You kind of are.
Yeah. So there's a lot of gratification in making that mix happen with all those musicians.
Well, also you got instant feedback from the crowd.
Yeah.
If you're mixing a live show and something goes over well, you hear it. You hear it right then and there. I always enjoyed mixing. That's my favorite part, mixing in the studio.
Yeah.
So I always enjoyed having a physical record that you could put in your car and you drive down the street and listen to a CD, or you hear something on the radio. To me, that was always great. And I've done a handful of shows at this point, but never enough to just feel that exhilaration from a live crowd like that. A couple times, but that's...
I know we don't have much time, but let me put this one here real quick.
Sure.
So you had Jeff King on your show, who's the band leader for Brooks and Dunn. And
He's a master.
Jeff is awesome. He's just not only he's a quality person, not only just an amazing player. But the artist I'm with, Elvie Shane, we were on the Brooks and Dunn tour, the reboot tour, and one of the shows that we did was at Frontier Days in Cheyenne, Wyoming, opening up for Brooks and Dunn, and it's 20,000 people. It's sold out, a massive outdoor. It's a rodeo. Frontier Days rodeo. And so we were on a rain delay. So the rain delay meant that we didn't get a sound check. Brooks and Dunn got their sound check. We got a little line check. I kind of checked everything. So 20,000 people, I step up to the console. My sound check is the first song. So, it's intense. Your heart's pounding, and, this could be my last job. This could be it. You have no idea what's going to happen. I guess it's that kind of a feeling that, I don't know, I live for that. I mean, I want a sound check. Of course I want a sound check, but
Sure.
But I don't know, something about that jumping, without
It's
a
that
trapeze,
challenge.
without a net or something. But
I'll tell you, Tony, I mean, you were one of the biggest inspirations, if not, mentors going through the whole process, starting from 1989 and going through SAE and, even afterwards, just following your career. It's definitely a pleasure, and pleasure having you here too. I mean, you brought me into SAE and put me in as an instructor without any idea of what I was capable of doing.
You did that.
I mean, I owe it all to you for that.
Nice.
But speaking of which, we do this thing here, sir, that we call Unsung Heroes, where we take a little time to shine the light on somebody who works behind the scenes that might not typically get a little bit of light shined on. Do you have anybody that you'd like to shine a little light on?
Man, I tell you, it's got to be my wife, Nancy. I mean, we've been through it all. We've been married almost 40 years. I met Nancy at the recording workshop.
Back at the recording workshop.
Yeah, if you remember, she was working in the office there. And, we started dating, and we were married in 6 months. And, we moved from Ohio to Atlanta to Nashville, and she stuck with me through the tough times. She's been my financial and moral support. She's the only one that really knows the work that's gone into this, and has some advice. I worked at a nuclear enrichment plant. Okay, so my boss there, his name was McFarland, and his son was an opera singer in New York City. And I said, Mac, of course, I probably shouldn't be telling my boss this, but it's like, I think I'm going to dedicate myself to music. I think that's my calling. And, and I know your son does this in New York. And do you have any advice? He says, yeah, get a wife with some medical insurance. So there you go. Thank you, Nancy, for the insurance.
Now, I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Tony truly is one of the best. In his determination, it should be an inspiration to all of us. So please join me in giving him a big thanks for taking the time to share his stories with us, and thank you for taking the time to hang with me here. I really do appreciate it. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. You can do that and find the links to everything mentioned over at jayfranze.com/episode 19. Thanks again for listening, and I'll catch you next week.
Thanks for listening to The Jay Franze Show. Make sure you visit us at jayfranze.com. Follow, connect, and say hello. This episode has been brought to you by VR Knives, your source for 100% custom knives made by a true rock star. So, if you're in the market for a new piece of art, reach out to VR Knives. 407-421-5528. 407-421-5528.